Jesus freak here. This may be more problematic to the Church of Rome than things I've said about the so-called Lucifer verses in Isaiah. But the Church of Rome suggests that Peter was the original leader of the church after Jesus' death. I beg to differ, and I think that the original leader of the church was the one known as James the Just. This is not one of the apostles, of which there was, I believe, there were two named James. And one even had a brother named Judas. But this was James, the half-brother of Jesus. I understand this, too, is going to be controversial to a lot of people, including Protestants, because some Protestants have historically believed in the same idea that the Church of Rome does, that that the brothers and sisters mentioned in the Gospels are not literal brothers and sisters. Now, people who push the idea that Peter was placed in charge of the church are no doubt going to quote from the Gospel of Matthew. And say that Jesus must necessarily be giving authority to Peter when he says this. I'm reading from Matthew 16. When Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" And they said, "Some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He saith unto them, "But whom say ye that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art that Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered and said unto him, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Now, catch the wording here. "And I say also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock." Now, I know that the name Peter means a little rock or a stone in Latin and Greek. This is wordplay. The rock is not Peter. The rock, Petra, is not Peter, Petros. The rock is his confession. Even the so-called Orthodox churches correctly teach this. So what about the keys of the kingdom verse? I'm going to quote again from Matthew, where he tells all his disciples as a group in chapter 18. Verily I say unto you, whatever ye shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. He's talking to his disciples as a group and saying this in the plural. So he didn't just give that authority to Peter. Now, some people are going to argue, and they have argued, that my statement elsewhere that James the Just was the leader of the church, not Peter, is unscriptural. Why was it so important that Peter made a point when the church he went to, he goes to meet John Mark, and everyone thinks he's dead. So here's where we're starting in Acts 12. And when he had considered the thing, this was after he was broken out of prison by an angel, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. And as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a damsel came to hearken, named Rhoda. The footnote says, as another reading is, came to ask who was there, which makes more sense. And when she knew Peter's voice, she opened not the gate for gladness, but ran in, and told how Peter stood before the gate. And they said unto her, Thou art mad. But she constantly affirmed that it was even so. Then said they, It is his angel. But Peter continued knocking. And when they had opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. But he, beckoning unto them with a hand to hold their peace, declared unto them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, Go and show these things unto James and to the brethren. And he departed and went into another place. Why was it so important that he made a point to say, Tell James what's going on? This, of course, is referring not to either of the apostles by that name, but to James the Just. The reason he needed to mention it specifically to James the Just was because it was James the Just who was in charge. In Acts 15, after a dispute involving Paul and Peter, it wasn't Peter who made the final decision and announced it to the people. Now, Peter gives a speech, but it's not Peter that makes the final call. I'm going to read from Acts 15. And certain men which came down from Judea taught the brethren and said, Except you be circumcised after the manner of Moses, you cannot be saved. When therefore Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and disputation with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain other of them should go up to Jerusalem unto the apostles and elders about this question. And being brought on their way by the church, they passed through Phoenicia and Samaria, declaring the conversion of the Gentiles, and they caused great joy unto all the brethren. And when they were come to Jerusalem, they were received of the church and of the apostles and elders, and they declared all things that God had done with them. But there rose up certain of the sect of the Pharisees which believed, saying that it was needful to circumcise them and to command them to keep the law of Moses. So we're talking Christian Pharisees like Paul was. And the apostles and elders came together for to consider of this matter. And when there had been much disputing, Peter rose up and said unto them, Men and brethren, you know how that a good while ago God made choice among us that the Gentiles by my mouth should hear the word of the gospel and believe. And God, which knoweth the hearts, bear them witness, giving them the Holy Ghost, even as he did unto us, and put no difference between us and them, purifying their hearts by faith. Now therefore why tempt ye God to put a yoke upon the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear? But we believe that through the grace of Jesus Christ we shall be saved even as they. Then all the multitude kept silence and gave audience to Barnabas and Paul, declaring what miracles and wonders God had wrought among the Gentiles by them. So basically, Peter is just one among many speaking at this point. And after they had held their peace, James answered, saying, Men and brethren, hearken unto me. Simeon hath declared how God at the first did visit the Gentiles, to take out of them a people for his name. And to this agree the words of the prophets, as it is written, After this I will return, and will build again the tabernacle of David which is fallen down, and I will build again the ruins thereof, and I will set it up, that the residue of men might seek after the Lord, and all the Gentiles upon whom my name is called, saith the Lord, who doth all things. Known unto God are all his works from the beginning of the world. Wherefore, my sentence is, that we trouble not them which from among the Gentiles have turned to God, but that we write unto them that they abstain from pollution of idols, and from fornication, and from blood. For Moses of old time hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. So the final decision wasn't Peter's. He just offered his own statement of what he had seen and heard. The final decision was left to James. Now, when Paul goes in to see the leaders of the church in Acts 21, it's mentioned that he specifically goes to meet up with James. And when Jews accuse Paul of bringing goys into the temple, he goes and wants to ritually purify himself at James' advice in Acts 21. And this is when Jews capture him. The so-called pillars of the church, as Paul declares, he names James the Just first. Then he names Cephas, who is Peter, and then he names John the Elder. And even elsewhere in Galatians, Paul suggests that James was seen as higher of an authority in the church than Peter. Now, traditionally, James the Just is called the Bishop of Jerusalem and Peter of Rome. James had his role as leader in Jerusalem before Peter had his in Rome, for what it's worth. So, to put it all together, James had authority before and above Paul. I mean, above Peter. Of course, Paul's authority, as so much as he had it came later. But James was reputed higher than Peter because Peter deferred to James. Jesus freak out.